compositional analysis, the way that he thinks about and develops a compositional analysis. I wonder how much that will sort of resonate with the kinds of questions you're working on as well. So yeah, the first what I thought we might do today, what I'm going to do for next time is work out. I want to keep like maybe share a screen and keep a marker board on the side and keep track for us the same way we use a marker board in a classroom of the concepts that we're going through. Because I think Jack is particularly good at developing concepts, picking up, creating, twisting, playing with concepts. And I think this book, paragraph by paragraph, is loaded with concepts that can sort of direct our inquiries as we go, or guide our inquiries as we go. But what I thought we would do with the last half hour that we have now is start the introduction. There's a couple paragraphs ending the first section and leading to a little bit of what Jack was sort of talking about, approaching fascism as culture. So fascism and as culture starts on page 5. But I thought I might start with just the 3 paragraphs at the end of 4 and the beginning of page 5, where he actually in there has the mention of strategic work that I was curious about, that I was asking about. So I think we might be able to go from there. I'll read these. If anybody wants to go back and touch on anything before this, that's great too. But let's do this, and then let's see what we can get from his sort of conclusion as he summarizes what he's going to do with the book. So culture is thus explicitly part of 21st century right-wing organizational strategy, encapsulated in the well-worn phrase, politics is downstream from culture, as Jack was just saying, right? As metapolitics, culture tends to be equated with ideas and beliefs, encoded in art and pop culture artifacts that are strategically shaped by organized actors. So culture tends to be equated, right, with ideas and beliefs that are strategically shaped by organized actors, tends to be equated. Those actors develop a fascist movement in order to establish a fascist state, moving from fringe internet culture to alt-right Trumpism. So this is an exploration of that. It's an articulation of that perspective, right? In this formulation, culture matters only when it is instrumentalized for a body formed outside of itself, such as when actors recruit followers through it. For example, some commentators classify popular culture as apolitical until specific individuals and groups hijack or infiltrate it to guide it to their own ends. Culture, and then this is the critique of that formulation, right? Culture can certainly operate as this kind of strategic messaging, but reducing it to a weapon and a channel becomes too intentionalist and even conspiratorial. So reducing culture to strategitive messaging, then, right, is the mistake.
I can finish the paragraph. You want me to finish the paragraph?
Oh yeah, go for it, please. Jay, dive in. Great.
Moreover, such a focus on strategic hijacking only works in retrospect. The analysis is already too late. The moment to understand culture is over. Since it only mattered in the moment, it was instrumentalized and not when it was apolitical. Such analysis hampers our ability to defeat fascism's future manifestations.
Awesome. Do you want to finish the last paragraph there? You want to take the last paragraph?
All right. This book, while recognizing cultures as metapolitics, centers culture and stays with it longer, since culture is the sphere where micropolitics take place. Such an approach is rooted in cultural studies where culture is not apolitical, waiting for external actors to politicize it. Instead, culture is always political, not just in the sense of expressing political dynamics formed in other spheres, but as the realm where values, power relations, subjective encounters, and capacities for connection and freedom develop. Specifically, this book examines the realm of microfascist cultural politics, which is composed before being organized, directed, even named.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Thanks so much. Any comments? Anybody want to dig into? I mean, I think that this is as Jack. For this group, I think taking a cultural approach to the study of fascism is probably not something that needs to be, the merits need to be proven. But do we want to discuss a little bit like what Jack's interlocutors, either named or unnamed here, are, and why Jack sort of needs to set up what we were exploring with him, at least a little bit, this question of culture, studies of fascism that view culture as a strategic instrument versus studies of fascism that view culture as sort of the grounding or milieu within which all of that kind of strategic work has to take place in the first place, and what the differences might be and why it might be important to shift our focus that way.
Yeah, so is this trying to say that people in fascist movements are also actors? Like sometimes commentators like to flatten it and say fascists are just followers because they're going against their own interests and they're just following the sovereign. The best example I've heard perhaps is like Jordan Klepper of The Daily Show. He'll go to shows and he says Trump supporters will play around with them because it's part of like the carnival. And that kind of pushes back at the notion that they're just followers, like they're active participants in moving.
That's great. Yeah. Does anybody want to pick that up? So Jacob's pointing to the sort of common sense or dominant sort of articulation of this as like fascist movements manipulating the members of fascist movements into the movement, versus what Jack's trying to say. Does anybody want to pick that up, and any examples of the way that fascism is articulated that way as like creating the motivations within subjects rather than, say, tapping into a cultural milieu that pre-exists the fascist organizer, or that kind of thing?
As we've been talking tonight, I've had two experiences kind of resonating for me. One is with my best friend that I grew up with in high school, and that was in northern Florida, so that can give you a hint of what the political scene might have been like. And the other one is with one of my sisters who lives in Utah, which can give you a hint of what that political culture might be like. So in both cases, what I've noticed over the last few years is an emerging, I don't even know what the word would be. I can't talk to either one of them anymore. I mean, I talk to my sister, but it's all very contained and superficial because there is no space for addressing what I care deeply about. And with my best friend, it was also the end of the friendship. I mean, there were some exchanges where the way people, both my sister and this other woman, were talking about people was so mean-spirited and so ugly that I couldn't recognize these people anymore. I mean, my sister or my friend. Like, I was left, what happened, right? This emergence of this, like, this mean-spiritedness that I kind of see played out now differently in the world with the tolerance for genocide. Like, how did we get to this place?
And Carolyn, I wonder, when you, I've had many of the same experiences, and I'm currently negotiating lots of the same things with family and friends that used to be closer friends and all that. How do you experience the relationship between like the concrete human subject that you're speaking to, right, and the ideology that they're tapping into? Like along these lines, like, do you And I'm not sure what my answer to this is. I'm not sure in the moment what like, do you experience that as, oh my God, this person is a good person who this movement has messed up? Or is it that this person has always felt this way, but this movement has tapped into something and allowed them to express it? You know what I mean? In terms of like a brainwashing versus a tapping into, how do you experience that? And generally around the group, how do we experience this everyday experience of fascism?
Yeah, and what I would say is I don't experience them as people who have always thought this way. But then I step back and I say, then what's unleashing this, right? And there's almost like something's been energized that's about avoiding the domination of having to be some other way, like the unleashing of, but it's that's why it's so curious to me, because it's not a match for the human beings that I'm accustomed to interacting with. But I also am aware that if I go out to Utah to visit family and I watch the news, I don't even watch the news here anymore. But anyway, if I watch the news there, I I see a dramatic difference, and it alerts me that the propaganda is so intense, right? And the ties to the the and I don't want to suggest that all Mormons are Republicans and fascists, but certainly there's this linking up of Christian nationalism with the Mormon religion. And so it's it's very, and I have a friend who's a professor at the University of Utah who I went to grad school with at Illinois, who's from New York. So we have all these conversations about what the hell is going on here, right? But it's an unleashing of having to care.
Mm.
I mean, of not having to care, right? I have permission to not care. I have
Mm-hmm.
a permission to retreat back to this old notion of this is what people deserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't deserve my compassion.
Does anybody else thank you. Does anybody else have similar experiences, like ways to articulate? So if we're thinking about this early sort of frame that Jack's giving us, that culture in these conversations is often treated as something strategically intentional, which is the way that I tend to think about it as a former strategist, right? That aims for like particular audiences and aims for particular changes in those audiences, versus the idea that a top-down creation of a fascist subject like that might not be what we're witnessing when we witness the emergence of fascist subjectivity collectively or individually. And then like that second question, right, is how do we experience that question in our everyday lives when we're dealing with people who are expressing these ideas, and we're trying to figure out, like, in a practical way, where are you getting this from? And were you not the person I thought you were this whole time? You were like a secret fascist, but you didn't feel permitted to do it. Or have you somehow been strategically targeted and turned by a movement who knew how to tap into you? Does anybody else have any experiences of this that sort of line up with this question of sort of where fascism is coming from and how to think about how to analyze it, what drives it?
Look,
Or other stuff?
it's
Yeah.
a very difficult problematic, because unless you begin with desire and libidinal flows, I don't think you have any real understanding of what's actually going on. And Jack, as you go into the next section of fascism and as culture, cites the great historian George Mosse, who wrote many good books on the French Revolution and the Ancien regime, on the importance of culture to better understand the existential imaginary, right? What is this social imaginary that people come up in? And then how is the libidinal economy directed in a certain way, right? How does this happen? And this to me is always the element of libido and language are always needs to be first and foremost in our minds when we begin to analyze this. You need the question of desire and always the question, of course, of the language that's expressing this, right? And a deepening of language. And one of the reasons we still read Lacan, Heidegger, others, in terms of understanding this in terms of not only symptomatic, right, but also in terms of reading the desire of the other. So again, this is why the book is so, again, very important in a way, because he's really trying to switch the discourse from that of just, as you said, strategy, the marketing, how are people turned, et cetera, into a question of, in some ways, he doesn't use this language, but you could really talk about it as libidinal investments and how those become solidified and then played upon and preyed upon, if you will, together. Yeah, yeah, going forward. So I think this is very, very important to remember. And also going back to what Caroline speaking about, that you have to understand people can take so much change. And, the 60s and the 70s, if you were in a certain moment, and you were open and free, there was massive change going on daily. Everyday life was really contingent. Everyday life was full of chance and change, right? And openness. And then a kind of tradition came back in that wanted stability, right? At any costs, right? And people can take so much change. And one of the going back to this whole notion of the culture, this kind of masculinity that was reignited. I was thinking when Jack was talking about how do you get people to vote for Mandami if you go into the sports bar? Well, you go into the sports bar, if you're like Stephen Miller, to get the masculine vote for Mandami, say, what a great halfback he would be compared to Cuomo. Look how stiff he is. He would not be able to do the end around, right? And then you would go in, and Curtis is more like a linebacker, right? It's just right here. So anyway, I'm just thinking in terms of these kind of strategic interventions, get the masculine vote out. So anyway, I think it's very important for us to always look at the existential desire in many ways. What's going on in one's existence? So I don't talk to when people in my family, I just tell them they're stupid. Josh has heard me on the phone. I just tell them they're stupid. I don't even engage. I don't go through pleasantries anymore. And then they hang up the phone and good riddance. I'll let them have the feeling of the choice that they've made, in a sense. But I mean, maybe that's a bad action on my point. But in some ways, I had a student a couple of years ago, or a year ago, actually. She went back to California so she can work with her white Christian nationalist family and save her sister from the fundamental Christianity. This is her desire. And I said, you in some ways you're wasting your time, in a way, because these things are very ingrained in terms of libidinal energy, et cetera. And in some ways, I try to think personally, how do you end up with a pessimism of the intellect like a Freud, a Gramsci, others, and you keep the will optimistic? This is really what we're really trying to do in the Institute and other groups that we're associated with. Keep the political will, keep the the enlightened will alive, right? In a sense, despite all the pessimism that's there. Yeah. So anyway, that's just my little, addition here. That we need to begin with desire, and this to me is why Guattari, in a way, was the radical of radicals, because he studied desire to his last days, right? In a sense, the micro powers, the micro, et cetera, regimes of madness. He tried to understand madness through this, right, in many ways. Hence the title, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, of the Anti-Oedipists. They were working out something. Speaking of the relationship of fascism and capitalism, for Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, what pure capitalism ultimately is produces schizophrenia. It produces, this is the disease of our time, when it's done. And it's not just the mind-body dualism that Cartesianism began. It's much deeper than this. in terms of desire. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm looking forward to thinking about is what if there is such a thing as a compositional strategy for anti-fascist desire, you know?
Right.
Like if composition doesn't just mean spontaneity and therefore we just have to wait for something good to be there so that we can tap into it or something. If there's something active to be done about composing anti-fascist care, then like what is that? How do we think about what anti-fascist desires would in a sports bar sound like, or around a poker table sound like, or in whatever other spaces sound like, feel like, and look like? And Michael, to your point, I was reading Stanley's essay on the necessity of philosophy. I reread that a couple times a year, and the uh, the way that social relations are put at the base in Stanley's sort of analysis and interpretation of critical theory and critical philosophy, and the way that social relations in a compositional analysis are approached is something that I'm thinking about very actively here, right? Like how, just again, whether or not it's even possible to think about a compositional strategy and what it would mean to strategically try to intervene to develop anti-fascist compositions, I think is a key question. A little bit after, just the next sentence after what you read at the bottom of page 5, Michael, Jack writes, only after comprehending fascism's subjective structure formed through vision, ideas, and comportment can we get a proper sense of fascist self-understanding and therefore its appeal. And in a nod to fascist philosopher Julius Evola, whose theories of subjectivity, war, and gender figure prominently in this book, Alexander Reed Ross notes, greater than mass-based civilization was culture, which as he understood it could be carefully curated by elites to channel the energy, which as he understood it, right, could be carefully curated by elites to channel the energy of the masses toward destruction, while leaving the higher echelon of spiritual warriors to play in the ashes. I want to return to that in just one moment. The culture curated by elites, right, to channel the energy. The most developed attention to culture for the purpose of the current project has been proposed by Roger Griffin. This is just the last paragraph in that section. Even within analyses that foreground culture, he finds that the genre of fascist studies neglects, quote, the attempts by fascism and Nazism to engineer a subjective revolution, as an integral part of their project to regenerate the nation. For Griffin, this means fascism is not best identified as a state form, a conventional political party, or even a movement. Indeed, fascism's creation of a new type of state was the materialization and externalization of a subjective revolution in values and national character. Griffin argues for an understanding of fascist culture as a wholesale transformation of the world, of time-space coordinates, as well as the direction of human development. His focus on culture will be key for our close attention to microfascism, as will his emphasis on the transformation of subjectivity, the new or reborn man, and on the types of composition that he calls groupuscules, fluid and amorphous clusters that are not attached to formal parties or structures. So just the two moments in here, going back, culture, as he understood it, could be carefully curated by elites to channel the energy of the masses. And then middle of the last paragraph, indeed, fascism's creation of a new type of state, and then the subjective revolution. All is to say that within his own writing, I think Jack is trying to, whether he's always conscious of it or whether it's happening behind his back, is this relationship between the strategic and intentional use of culture over generations to develop and produce fascist subjectivity versus the composition of fascist subjectivity outside of or around, maybe is even better, that strategic moment, and like how that strategic moment and the compositional milieu interact with each other. And again, whether or not it can be or should be articulated as fascist strategizing, thinking about culture strategically to create, or if they're just, what does that mean in a composition within which it makes sense to narrate their actions in this way? You know what I mean? Like, what impact, what effect does strategic production of culture over generations finally have? And is the composition of like a left or anti-fascist care, are we in the early generations of what must be a strategic generational project? Or are we thinking along the wrong track when we think that we can strategically engineer culture so that it will create anti-fascist subjectivities rather than fascist subjectivities? And if it's a mistake to think strategically about culture that can produce anti-fascist subjectivities, then why spend so much time talking about the ways that fascists have purposely built culture in order strategically to produce fascist subjectivities? So again, it's this sort of back and forth or push and pull or entanglement between strategy and composition that I think is so productive and such a huge question mark when we're thinking about what can or should be done, like what we can do, right?
You can take the old leftist example of the policeman. He's working class. But what does he do? He defends the, propertied, elites, right? This is who he works for. This is what he defends at all costs, right? Etc.
Yep.
Very
And I think that's right. That the right. So that's back to something like like Stanley or like the Henri Lefebvre. Like, it's social relations that are the base. So like, it's the way we're going to live and the way we interact, the language that we use, moment to moment, day to day, the relations of domination and submission that we take as common sense. Then that would be like the source of our language, or the source of our assumptions about relations, the source of our sadistic glee or anti-sadistic glee or whatever. But is that then what we're saying, that before language, or like within language, within this composition, or maybe that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the composition, is those kind of structured relationships that we reproduce and that we exist in and take as common sense from moment to moment in our everyday lives.
I just want to add, I think there's so many different components to this, including, to go back to Freud, fear. So, I mean, we're already at a point where people are seeing others being disappeared on the street, even if only on TV. And what does that do to, the psyche? And especially if you're in a environment, geographical or whatever, where everybody already is going along, or maybe they've, been affected by some of the themes you're talking about already.
Yeah.
People just don't want to end up being the scapegoated themselves. And that may not be a conscious feeling, or it may be even.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, Christine. I'm seeing this as Michael and Jack were mentioning as well in within our union spaces, and even within the more radical sort of union offshoot organizations that were created specifically because the union was too conservative. Even in those spaces, the dominant common sense has been to lay low and hope that this sort of passes by. So even in these sort of left-oriented organizational spaces, an active anti-fascism is not, that in my experience anyways, is nascent.
Yeah, there's a great sequence, and Josh knows this well, in the second part of Battle of Chile, where the intellectuals are trying to tell the workers we have to wait, right, in order to take power. And the workers say, why not now? And have the best analysis going on. And this goes on time and time again in leftist organizations. Why wait? The left really, in some ways, come to understand this through many, many years, is afraid of power. It's afraid of taking power. It's afraid of taking the real initiative. It always has a great critique, smart layers of thinking, et cetera, but to actually take the initiative, take the upper hand, take power, very lacking, you know?
Well,
And
do you
it's,
think that's left, or is that another word we haven't used yet?
I'm sorry,
Liberalism.
sorry?
Well, you're saying the left is afraid of taking power. Do you think that's really left, or do you think that's another word that hasn't been spoken yet, and that is liberalism?
Well,
True.
maybe liberalism too. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's what the left goes towards. It tends towards liberalism, instead of going more to the left. That's a tendency.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think consistent, right, with Stanley Aronowitz's critique of the left as being trapped in protest and resistance, right? That like
Yeah.
the liberal notion of having voice is like enough, and we don't need anything except our voice. As long as we're allowed to protest and
Yeah.
and collectively bargain, then we're good here. You know, there's nothing else to sort of fight for. Versus the more left-oriented, well, no, it needs to be our perspective that's in decision-making power. And maybe that's, Jacob, what you're pointing to is right. Maybe a contest within these organizational spaces between sort of liberalism and emerging social democracy, and maybe something emergent even to the left of social democracy in some of these spaces, although I'm less than 100% sure about that.
Yeah, I found out about the book through Counterpoints, and I found out about this group through Counterpoints. And Counterpoints, yeah, what I found interesting is Jack wrote a lot about anarchism and autonomous Marxism, which is not usually found in the academy too often. Liberalism is more the dominant pedagogy within the academy. So that's why I think Common Notions sounded like reached out to Jack about making this book more public facing.
Very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons both Carolina and I don't retire, they need people like us in the academy too. We're the part of the very few that are still trying to confront this, just violent conformism, the whatever culture, we have to adapt to the changes. Never really any analysis. Yeah, it's very, very, very strange what's going on. Yeah. I teach autonomous Marxism. I'm actually teaching Empire this semester. So yeah, in the academy. So anyway.
Yeah, sorry. I just had a quick thought and then it jumped out of my mind about autonomism and what we're doing with the group here.
Well, they talk about Sylvia Federici in the book. So I think she's been published by Common Notions. So.
Have you, Jacob, have you read the Caliban and the Witch?
No, I read Re-Enchanting. It was also published by PM Press. It's like Re-Enchanting Nature or something, ecofeminism. But yeah, I know that's her more famous book.
Yeah, it's great. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about it in some detail when we get to that part of microfascism here. Okay, it's 9:06. So do we want to cut it off for now and then pick it up 7 p.m. next Monday? And next Monday, we'll dig right into the pages of the book. I'm going to have a handful of concepts that I definitely want to make sure we pause on and discuss for a while. If anybody else wants to read the intro and first chapter before Monday and come in with any questions or stuff that you're dying to talk about as well, that'll be great.
So the structure would be to go through one section. There are 5 chapters. What's the plan, the organizational plan? To do one a week? One.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, right. So
that's what I'm thinking. So next week we'll hit a couple high points at the end of the introduction, and then dive into chapter 1, and we'll hopefully feel like we've gotten kind of a handle on chapter 1 by the end of next week.
Right. Okay.
Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah, thank you. It was
Yes,
great.
thank
Great.
you.
that We had, all these energies unleashed here today. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for everybody who showed up for the first session. Like I said, this is my first session facilitating a group with IRI. So I especially
What time are we meeting? 7 or 7:30?
That's a good question too.
that is a good
7.
question.
I think we should say 7.
Yes.
Let's do 7.
We get
Yeah.
hungry here in Brooklyn. Yeah.
Great. Yeah,
Okay.
7 works. Let's do 7 then.
Right.
Thank
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Go Mondami. We'll,
Yes.
Hey.
or we'll see what happens here. Yeah.
Great. Take care, everybody. See you next week.
Okay, good night.
Hey.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Good. Very good. Yeah. And hopefully your students will come next week and
I hope
everybody
so.
comes to 7. No, they get a lot out of this. I mean, come on. I mean, this is it's a wellspring of yeah, a wealth of riches here. So
It is this, and now that we've gotten the first session under our belts, I'll encourage them a little bit more
but yeah.
to check it out. And the couple students on the list may have been a little bit nervous. I don't know. I'll circle back with them.
Well, they don't have to be nervous. Just come to listen, As I
Exactly.
was told when I first started philosophy, go to Germany and listen for 2 years.
That's essentially what I did in Stanley's classes for the first 3 years. Was sit there and listen and take notes and look up everything that I had never heard of before. And I mean, that's a great
That's a lot,
experience.
huh? Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you so much. It was great to see Jack, and I hope the great thing about him, he'll engage. It's nice, he doesn't deflect or anything, and I really, really admire that about him. So
Yeah, he's a good dude. He really is.
I mean, this is a very, very great great intervention. I mean, really, when I say this, it means, I've gone through it, and this is really an original work in many ways, because he's taking on dominant schools of how the traditional historical schools, traditional sociological, political, and the Marxist schools about fascism have gone. So this is very interesting in a different way.
I'm really happy to hear. I thought you would like it. I really did. I'm
No, I'm grateful, very grateful.
And I mean, the idea of like a 400-page book on death style fascism by Jack I didn't know that this was like the introduction to something.
This is like Adorno's jargon of antithesis. And
yeah. I didn't realize. I mean, man, I would read the heck out of that book.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Michael Pelias said it was a prolemogama, like the jargon of authenticity, the negative dialectics.
I
so
love it.
Have to be his model. Yeah, right.
I love it.
Okay,
All right, Michael. Well,
okay,
I'll
David,
talk to you.
great to see you, man, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.